All right, my darlings, we are partway through our novel study of the BFG, and that silly coronavirus has interrupted school. So I am going to be reading you the chapters of the BFG and uploading them to YouTube so that you can listen to them at home. I will try to keep the pictures in the video so that you can see what Quentin Blake has added to the story with his drawings. So I am rereading the last chapter we read at school, called Dream Catching. The big friendly giant put the suitcase on the ground. He bent down low so that his enormous face was close to Sophie's. From now on, we is keeping as still as winky little miceies, he whispered. Sophie nodded. The misty vapor swirled around her. It made her cheeks damp and left dewdrops in her hair. The BFG opened the suitcase and took out several empty glass jars. He set them ready on the ground, with their screw tops removed. Then he stood up very straight. His head was now high up, in the swirling mist, and it kept disappearing, then appearing again. He was holding the long net in his right hand. Sophie, staring upwards, saw through the mist that his colossal ears were beginning to swivel out from his head. They began waving gently to and fro. Suddenly, the BFG pounced. He leaped high in the air and swung the net through the mist with a great swishing sweep of his arm. "Got him!" he cried. "A jar! A jar! Quick! Quick! Quick!" Sophie picked up a jar and held it up to him. He grabbed hold of it. He lowered the net. Very carefully he tipped something absolutely invisible from the net into the jar. He dropped the net and swiftly clapped one hand over the jar. "The top!" he whispered. "The jar top, quick!" Sophie picked up the screw top and handed it to him. He screwed it on tight, and the jar was closed. The BFG was very excited. He held the jar close to one ear and listened intently. "It's a wink squiffler," he whispered with a thrill in his voice. It's even better. It's a golden fizz wizard. A golden fizz wizard." Sophie stared at him. Oh my, he said, holding the jar in front of him. "This will be giving some little toddler a very happy night when I is blowing it in." "Is it really a good one?" Sophie asked. "A good one!" he cried. "It's a golden fizz wizard. It is not often I is getting one of these." He handed the jar to Sophie and said, "Please be still as a starfish now. I is thinking there may be a whole swarm of fizz wizards up here today. And do kindly stop breathing. You is terribly noisy down there." "I haven't moved a muscle," Sophie said. "Then don't," the BFG answered sharply. So when we read this in class, we talked about listening to yourself breathe and how loud is that. So take just a second and do that now. Listen to yourself breathe. Does that seem like a loud sound to you? The BFG is telling Sophie that she's terribly noisy with her breathing. I think that reminds us just how good his hearing is. All right. Once again, he stood up tall in the mist, holding his net at the ready. Then came the long silence, the waiting, the listening, and at last, with surprising suddenness, came the leap and the swish of the net. "Another jar!" he cried. "Quick, quick, quick!" When the second dream was safely in the jar and the top was screwed down, the BFG held it to his ear. "Oh no!" he cried. "Oh, mince my maggots! Oh, swipe my swoggles!" "What's the matter?" Sophie asked. "It's a troggle humper," he shouted. His voice was filled with fury and anguish. "Oh, save our solos!" he cried. "Deliver us from weasels! The devil is dancing on my dibbler!" "What are you talking about?" Sophie said. The BFG was getting more distressed every moment. "Oh, bash my eye bones!" he cried, waving the jar in the air. "I come all this way to get lovely golden dreams, and what is I catching?" "What are you catching?" Sophie said. "I is catching a frightsome Trogglehumper," he cried. "This is a bad, bad dream. It is worse than a bad dream. It is a nightmare." "Oh dear," Sophie said. "What will you do with that?" "I is never letting it go," the BFG cried. "If I do, then some poor little toddler will be having the most curd-bloodling time. This one is a real Kixie Bog Thumper. I is exploding it as soon as we get home." "Nightmares are horrible," Sophie said. "I had one once, and I woke up sweating all over." "With this one, you would be waking up screaming all over," the BFG said. "This one would make your teeth stand on end. If this one got into you, your blood would be freezing to icicles, and your skin would go creeping across the floor." "Is it as bad as that?" "It's worse," cried the BFG. "This is a real Wopsy Grobswitcher." "You said it was a Trogglehumper," Sophie told him. "It is a Trogglehumper," cried the exasperated BFG. "But it is also a Bog Thumper and a Grobswitcher. It is all three riddled into one. Oh, I is so glad I is catching it tight. Ah, you wicked beastie, you," he cried, holding up the jar and staring into it. "Never more is you going to be bunk-doodling the poor little human beanie toddlers." Sophie, who was also staring into the glass jar, cried out, "I can see it! There's something in there!" "Of course there is something in there," the BFG said. "You is looking at a frightsome Trogglehumper." "But you told me dreams were invisible." "They is always invisible until they is captured," the BFG told her. "After that, they is losing a little of their invisibility. We is seeing this one very clearly." Inside the jar, Sophie could see the faint scarlet outline of something that looked like a mixture between a blob of gas and a bubble of jelly. It was moving violently, thrashing against the sides of the jar and forever changing shape. "It's wiggling all over the place," Sophie cried. "It's fighting to get out. It'll bash itself to bits." "The nastier the dream, the angrier it is getting when it is in prison," the BFG said. "It is the same as with wild animals. If an animal is very fierce and you is putting it in a cage, it will make a tremendous rumpeldumpus. If it is a nice animal, like a cockatoodaloo or a fogglefrump, it will sit quite nicely. Dreams is exactly the same. This one is a nasty, fierce, bog-rotting nightmare. Just look at him splashing himself against the glass." "It's quite frightening," Sophie cried. "I would be hating to get this one inside of me on a darksome night," the BFG said. "So would I," Sophie said. The BFG started putting the bottles back into the suitcase. "Is that all?" Sophie asked. "Are we going?" "I is so upset by this troggle-humping, bog-thumping Grobswitcher," the BFG said, "that I is not wishing to go on. Dream catching is finished for today." Soon Sophie was back in the waistcoat pocket, and the BFG was racing home as fast as he could go. When at last they emerged out of the mist and came again to the hot yellow wasteland, all the other giants were sprawled out on the ground, fast asleep. So that is the end of the chapter called Dream Catching. We did talk about this one at school and about how there is a difference between the good dreams and the bad dreams, the golden fizz wizards, which seem to be the best dreams possible, and the terrible Trogglehumper, which seems to be the worst dream possible. So we kind of wondered what the BFG might do with that Trogglehumper. It's a really, really bad dream. And we had some predictions. Excuse me. The BFG talks about exploding the dream when he gets home. But I believe we also had some ideas about just keeping it locked up in a jar forever so that it could never hurt anyone. And if I'm not mistaken, I think someone did actually predict that maybe the BFG would give the bad dream to the blood bottler. And I don't know if you were paying attention, but you probably saw the title for the next chapter. So tune into the next video and you'll get to find out for sure what happens to that Trogglehumper dream. Thanks for listening.